Well, let's move on to kind of our final topic that I wanted to discuss with you. In the last month or two, there has been a crackdown on protesters that have protested, certain schools' involvement with a foreign country, specifically Israel. And we basically have, people that might have written an op-ed. They might have, supported not being involved in another foreign country, and they're basically the government is really just kind of unilaterally stripping um, their. I mean, a lot of these people are legal permanent residents. They have green cards, and it's basically saying, no, we're going to get rid of your green card based on your speech, based on some of your views, and we're just going to deport you. And then there's kind of the another issue, which is, the big one was Trump sending like 200 people to this, basically like black site type torture prison in El Salvador, with like no apparent due process whatsoever. So, what are your thoughts on those two issues?
I'm sure they're not going to agree with yours, but let's just say yeah, let's say I think I don't always pronounce it. I think it's Tren de Agua. Okay, I don't know how that
Yeah,
if
that's
it's
actually
it,
yeah, that's Tren de Agua. So that's talking
yeah,
about
I
the
might have mispronounced
Venezuelans that
that,
were
but I
sent
think
to
it's
El
pronounced
Salvador.
yeah,
Yeah, it's Tren de
yeah,
Agua.
Tren de Agua.
You said Tren de
Yeah,
Agua. Yeah, correct.
yeah. The Alien Enemies Act. Okay, well, if you ask me about the Probate Act, I can probably give you a coherent opinion. Okay, but I'm not an expert on the Alien Enemies Act. But it does have language in there that this is an act. First of all, that's approximately over 200 some years old. Okay, I mean the act was, I think it was John Adams who put the act into existence, and Thomas Jefferson hated that law. I'm sure part of the reason he hated the law was because he felt that it gave the president too much power. I believe that's probably what he felt. Oh, he's popping the law up on me and he's going
Yeah,
to
here it
start
is, right
citing law
here.
to me.
Yeah,
Okay.
here it is, right here.
In any event, okay, so the law's been out there for over some 200 years, and Democrat administrations, Republican administrations have had ample opportunity to amend or change that law, and they never have. Okay, the law is still basically the same law as it was, as I understand it, when it was passed. Democrat presidents have used that law, and Republican presidents have used that law. They don't use it very much because there's certain requirements in the act that you have to follow before you can actually invoke it. I mean, but they don't use it that much because they can't. But there are some requirements that people think that are a little too broad. If the president feels that there is a predatory incursion coming in, and the president's view would be that, listen, Venezuela and other countries are purposely sending their criminals and their gang members to our country to essentially create chaos and other issues in our country. He can make an invocation, which he has. He's declared that you can't do that, okay? And then he can enforce the act. I believe that's all he's done. He's trying to enforce the act as written. Now I know that Judge, it might be Brosberg, I can't remember his name, but I said, well, wait a minute. What about due process rights? What about this? What about that? What about this? Well, my concern would have been if due process was the fundamental concern about in that act, why hasn't it ever been amended? I mean, it should have been amended to say, okay, but the president can do this, but still there has to be judicial review.
It does say
My
that. It says
understanding,
Section 23 right here. It says jurisdiction of United States courts and judges. And it says, after any such proclamation has been made, the several courts of the United States having criminal jurisdiction and the several justices and judges of the courts of the United States are authorized, and it shall be their duty upon complaint against any alien enemy resident and at large within such jurisdiction or district to the danger of the public peace or safety, and contrary to the tenor or intent of such proclamation from the president, to cause such aliens to be duly apprehended and conveyed before such court, judge, and justice So it actually says that right there in the law
Well, it hasn't
that they
always been
that
applied that way, and I can tell you that, as you know already, that law has already been taken up before a three judge panel on the district court, and the two judges agreed with the lower court judge, and one judge disagreed. And I got to believe it's ultimately going to the Supreme Court. Um,
yeah,
in my view,
the last time this was invoked,
go
because
ahead.
this is only being invoked 3 times during the War of 1812, during World War One and World War Two. So actually declared wars. And last time I checked, we Congress never declared war on Venezuela. Um, and
That's
it's not.
true. That's true. But it has other reasons why you can do it too. It's
Yeah,
there's language in there calls it called as a predatory incursion or some other
yeah, yeah.
language about doesn't it
You're
doesn't
right. So
always
I'll
have
read it
to be
out.
a
I'll read it out for everybody. So,
yeah.
or, right, besides declared war, or any invasion or predatory incursion is perpetrated, attempted, or threatened against the territory of the United States by any foreign nation or government, and the president makes public proclamation of the event, all native citizen denizens subject to the hostile nation or government, being at the age, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They can be apprehended. But it's also not clear to me that this gang has any direct connection, and there's been no evidence presented that this gang has any direct connection to the Venezuelan government. In fact, what I've read, I've seen actually the contrary, that Venezuela has been trying to crack down on it in the past several years. I'm not exactly sure why we are going around due process, especially when the law says that you're supposed to get due process, which none of these
Well, I
people that
think
got sent, I mean, none of these people that got sent, not back to Venezuela, they got sent to a completely different foreign country, into a prison that is known for just horrible human rights abuses, and they may never be able to get out. And they never,
okay.
ever received any due process to determine whether they actually were a member of this gang or not. I mean, there's several people. There was like a soccer player who had actually protested the Maduro government multiple times, and because he had a tattoo, which was a tattoo of his favorite soccer team, he was then disappeared to another country. Which, we've never actually done. We've never really done this before, where we deport someone to another country to just be like forgotten about in some prison. And
Well,
back in World War II, when this was invoked and it was used for like Japanese internment, which I think most people regard as pretty reprehensible at the time, um, even the Nazis were given due process. So we gave Nazis due process, but we're not willing to give alleged members of a gang that we don't really have any evidence that they are due process.
well, I'll go back to some of your premises. One, I mean, I when you say the premises that this Venezuelan this gang has not been pushed into this country by the leader of Venezuela, I respectfully would say that's not the case. I think they have. I think they have done that in the past. I think foreign countries have pushed. They're criminals. They're mentally ill. They're people that they don't want to deal with anymore, and they let us have them. Then, if you send them in here, and there is some evidence that they may have been trying to cause chaos and confusion within our country, and other issues and illegal activities in our country, that happens. And then you come in and you say, did the president make a proclamation? He did. Okay. He did make a proclamation. And then he invoked the act. Okay. How much judicial review that statute has given um, people in that situation, I don't know that the courts are all in agreement on that, because one judge in the federal district court seemed to, or the appellate court was seemed to be completely in favor of the Trump administration's position on it, and two judges were opposed, but one judge even still said, "Okay, fine, you got to do a little bit more here." But then he said, "You can still detain them. You can still go get them, and you can detain them."
Yeah, I'm not actually
Okay,
arguing against the detainment, but like, what's the to stop the federal government from arresting you and sending you to this prison, and they just label you a gang member?
well, I would concur that that is a legitimate concern, but it isn't normally going to be applied. First of all, the president would have to feel that there's a predatory incursion or a declaration of war, which I don't know how I would fall under a declaration of war. Um,
Yeah, but
I
all
don't
the
know how
government
I.
has to do is say, we don't believe you're a citizen. We believe you're a Venezuelan gang member, and we're going to send you there, and you have no due process. There's nobody that's going to check to make sure you're not a citizen.
Well, I would be able to invoke my rights and privileges as a citizen of the United States because there is evidence that I'm a United States citizen.
Yeah, but they're
Okay.
not going to look at it. You're never going to see a judge. That's what's happening. You're
Yeah,
never going to see a judge. You're never going to be able to file a writ of habeas corpus. You would never even.
I think in those I think in what's going on is they're not U.S. citizens. Okay, they're not U.S. citizens. They're not. They've been determined to be of a group that's been sent in here to be do certain things, and that they've been sent out. I think as this law continues, I think what really ought to happen is because you can't have this law being the way it is without some type of if people are going to demand that there be some type of oversight over this law, because I think the law is broader than you read it. The president can pretty much damn near do anything he wants under this law. Okay. Okay. Whether that's right is another issue. But that issue should be addressed in an amendment to the bill, not through the courts. I mean, if Congress wants to take it up and say, you know what, hey, this law is too broad, we need to rein it in a little bit, they can amend it. I
But the
mean,
law does say you have a right to go in front of a judge. That's what I
well,
just read you the law. That's what it says from
well,
1789.
it'll be figured out in the courts. I can tell you that. Okay, they'll end up determining what it says and what it means. Okay,
And
um,
meanwhile, you have 200 people that are, basically. I mean, we won't know if they ever get out of El Salvador, out of this like prison, out of this torture dungeon.
well, you say it's a torture dungeon. I mean, is it? I don't know. I mean,
I mean,
that's
a
what
lot of
you
human
say.
rights groups have also said that.
I know, I know. The human rights groups have said that too.
Do,
Okay,
do,
I'm sure they
do you
have. Okay, but
recognize do you recognize that all immigrants, even undocumented immigrants, have full civil rights? Like the Bill of Rights applies to them?
I'm not an expert on that area of law, but I would take the position that I don't I question whether you have full civil rights if you're not a citizen of the United States.
Yeah, because the
Okay,
Fifth
I
Amendment says
know there's
all
certain
persons.
provisions where it might say in the Constitution, it's how it's been interpreted, that listen, if you come here illegally, can you avail yourself of the same rights of a United States citizen?
Yeah, so the Supreme Court has repeatedly said aliens who have once passed through our gates, even illegally, may be expelled only after proceedings conforming to traditional standards of fairness encompassed in due process of law. That was Shaughnessy v. United States in 1953. The court reasoned that aliens physically present in the United States, regardless of their legal status, are recognized as person, guaranteed due process of law by the Fifth, and 14th Amendment. That was Plyler v. Doe. The court determined even one whose presence in this country is unlawful, involuntary, or transitory is entitled to that constitutional protection. So, I mean, the Supreme Court has repeatedly said over and over, any person, as long as you are a human being in this country, you have
No, I was
full
aware of that.
constitutional
I was
rights.
aware that there was a distinction in the law that said as long as you're a human being, that you can avail yourself of certain rights. But, Congress still gets to come in and say these are, when you say due process, still someone has to define what that due process would be. Okay. Someone has to say, all right, you get a right to a hearing, you get a right to this, you get a right to that. Okay. Has that been done under this act? I don't know that if that act has been in conflict with that president for this long, why didn't some court or somebody else come in and say this act needs to be changed because it's in
Because in the
conflict
past,
with
when they did it,
existing.
those people, in the past, when they did
No,
it,
the
those
no, the
people
Supreme
got
Court
a
will tell
trial.
us.
Nazis, literal Nazis, got more constitutional protections than immigrants from Venezuela.
The Supreme Court will eventually tell us, okay, what that law means and how that complies with that precedent that you cited. Okay, they will, but I still think when you say due process, I mean, when you say due process, I think you mean they got all this stuff out here. I think when they say due process, the due process is not a set defined term. Who defines what due process should be? The law
The
does.
Fifth Amendment.
Congress is,
The Fifth Amendment's actually pretty clear. The Fifth and
well,
Sixth
but
Amendment are actually
Congress
pretty
will
clear
have
on
to
what due
write,
process
right?
is.
Congress, yeah, but the amendments only say you're entitled to due process. They don't say what due process is.
You're entitled to a hearing. You're entitled to tell you what the charges are. You're entitled to go in front of a judge, and a judge can adjudicate. And again,
I
that
believe
same
that's a,
law in
I believe
1789,
when you say
88
you're
or
entitled to
whatever,
a hearing, you're entitled to a hearing, you're entitled to a thing. I believe that comes out of the law. It doesn't come out of the Constitution. The Constitution just says you're entitled to due process. You're entitled to fairness. But it doesn't say what fairness is.
no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury, except in cases arising in land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in times of war or public danger, nor shall any person be subjected to the same offense to be twice put in jeopardy of life or limb, nor shall be compelled in any criminal case to be a witness against himself, nor be deprived life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. That's what it says. I mean, that's what due process is.
It says no person shall be held, but it also said public danger, except in cases of public danger.
Yeah, but I mean, you still need to like go in front of a judge to be able to determine what's public danger. I mean, that's the problem. Like, what
No,
prevents
but that's what I'm telling you, Zach. There no you. Someone's got to define what public danger is, and the Alien Enemies Act came in and said a public danger is a predatory incursion. And when the Alien Enemy Act says it's a predatory incursion is a public danger, then the president has almost unilateral authority to do what he feels he needs to do to protect the public from the public danger.
except not put them in front of a judge. That's what that exact same law says.
I understand your position. I mean, but I'm just saying
I'm just
that
reading
when
what the law
you
says, man. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
you can come to me and say, but you skipped over the part. Let's be honest. You skipped over the part that there was an exception for public danger.
I didn't
Okay.
skip over it. I read it out.
Okay. But there is one. It says you're not entitled to some of that that if there's a public danger. Or who declares there's a public danger?
Hello, everyone. Future Zach here. I just wanted to add this comment about the Fifth Amendment that says, except in cases arising in the land or naval forces or in the militia, when in actual service in time of war or public danger. This only applies to people in the military and military tribunals. It does not just simply apply to an executive says there's a public danger and nobody gets due process anymore. Again, I'm not exactly sure why an attorney does not know this.
Someone's got to
I mean,
declare it. I mean, I suppose
yeah,
the act says, well, the Congress declares it when there's an act of war. Okay, so act of war is a declared public danger. Okay, so fine, but it doesn't say it doesn't really define a predatory incursion. It
I
doesn't
mean,
really define it. And the president has felt like he's gone through the process of saying, I issued my proclamation. I feel this issue presents a public danger. Therefore, I can act on the basis of this act. Okay, and you
and no
can sit
one's
there and
allowed to
say, well,
double
yeah, but
check or question it in any way. No one's allowed to make sure that this is accurate or not. That seems to be what the Trump administration is saying. Again, I mean, I hope that they don't come after you and just unilaterally just say, well, we think that you're part
well,
of
I'm
Tren
not
de
worried.
Aragua. Man, I
I'm
mean,
not, I'm not
sucks to be
worried that
you.
they.
I guess we're going to send you to El
I'm
Salvador now.
I'm not worried that they would. Or that they ever will, because they're never going to be able to argue that that I'm not an American citizen, and they're never going to be
Argue
able
in
to
front of
argue
who?
that I came here illegally.
Who would
And
they
they're
need to
never.
argue that with?
I'm sorry.
Who would they need to argue that with?
They can't just pick you up off the street, okay? But it's a different situation when there's a
Why?
public
Why not?
danger. The
Why
president has
not? Like,
declared that this is an predatory incursion which creates a public danger in which I have to act immediately to resolve the public danger.
okay, and what I'm saying is like, why would they not just be able to pick you up off the street, which they have done, and send you to El Salvador? What would
Well, they
prevent them
haven't
from
picked
doing that?
I will say they haven't ever picked me just up off the street
Yeah,
and
but if they
declared.
did, what would stop them from just unilaterally sending you to an El Salvadorian torture chamber?
Because I'm going to take the view that they had to have some form of probable cause to believe that those people were actual members of Tren de Agua, okay, and they had some proof that they were members of Tren de Agua and that they were here illegally. I do not believe they just went out and picked people off the street and said you're out. Okay, I believe that they went in and they had reasons to believe, probably very good reasons to believe, that these people were members of a of this gang, that they're here illegally, and that they present a danger to our country, and we have to remove them immediately to resolve the danger.
I mean, there was at least one guy who was like a gay barber who came here, and he had no ties to the gang. Over 100 of those people had already agreed to be self-deported back to Venezuela, and instead of sending them to Venezuela, they got sent to El Salvador. I mean, again, I keep asking you, like, what prevents them from just picking you up? And you said, well, they have good evidence, but they're never going to prove the evidence. They're never going to show us the evidence. Where do they have to show the evidence that protects you from just unilaterally being kidnapped and sent to El Salvador?
The Supreme Court can tell me what they have to do.
Okay, but Trump is not putting anyone in front of any court, let alone the Supreme Court, before he's sending these people to a country that they don't originate from.
Oh, I think they knew darn well that when they made that move, there was going to be a lawyer that was going to file for injunctive relief with a federal district court judge. They knew that was going to happen. Okay. Because the way it happened, they knew what was going to happen. Okay. They knew that was going to happen. And they had him out of international airspace. They had him into international airspace before anything could be done.
Okay, but this is still my point. They did that before any judge could look over anything, could verify anything that they said. I mean,
but what I'm saying is, I get what you're saying. Yeah, there should have been due process. But what I'm saying is that act, if you feel that there should be a different type of due process, it should be spelled out in the act more clearly than it is right now.
it
Because
says
I
you have
don't
to
think
go in
it's
front of
clear.
a judge. That's the bare
I don't
minimum.
think
That's
it's
all it
clear.
says. You need to go in front of a judge.
I don't agree with that. I think the courts have always interpreted that statute extremely broadly to give a president almost unlimited authority to do this, as long as he feels he has probable cause to do it. He's announced that there's a predatory incursion. He's made a proclamation of it, and then he did follow the processes of the act. If you really watch what he did,
Except putting them
they
in front of a judge, which is part of the act.
they did follow the processes of the act. Okay, and then they removed them. Okay, I mean,
Okay.
now going into the future, I mean, to me, I think it was more of a
Spectacle.
they got these guys out immediately. They got these guys out immediately because they knew that future cases were going to be brought before courts. And they did it on purpose, is because they're trying to send a message to people that if you're still here, get out of here on your own now. Because
Yeah, no, I
You see Christy Nome going around saying, "Hey, if you're here illegally, nothing stops you from self-deporting."
yeah, no,
No,
I
nothing.
understand that the Trump administration's immigration goals have been we're going to be as terrifying and strict as possible to prevent people from coming here. Like I understand
Well,
that that's the goal.
I think it's more they're trying to be as terrifying as and scary as possible. So you'll leave on your own.
Exactly.
Don't make
You and
us
I
come.
are in agreement.
Don't
Yes, you
make
and I
us
are in
come.
agreement on this.
Don't make us come and get you. If you're here illegally, self deport.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'll
Because
send you to.
if we have to come and get you after, and you wouldn't leave, your chances of coming back in are going to be harder coming back in than if you self deport and try to come back in. That's what they're basically saying. You self deport now, and it'll be easier for you to come back later. Or do not self deport, and we're going to hold that against you when you apply to come back in later because we had to force you out of the country.
Nobody that's in that El Salvadorian prison has any chance of applying again.
Well, I'm not
This
an
is the
expert on
problem.
that. I'm not an ex.
I'm not
I'm not
arguing
an
that
ex.
there's. I'm not
Go
arguing that
ahead.
there's no legitimate reason to deport somebody. I'm saying that if you send them to another country, into a prison, and they have no redress. There is no process by which they can challenge this in any way, including if you were a citizen, because you never went in front of it. You never had the ability to say, here's my birth certificate showing that ICE has no authority over me. None of those people that got sent there, we may never hear from them ever again. And that I think should be a huge red flag. I mean, that there's other countries that absolutely will just disappear people into black sites.
Right now, you have 3 federal judges who have said your interpretation is correct. There ought to be something. And you've had one judge that says, no, there shouldn't be. It'll ultimately end up going to the U.S. Supreme Court, I believe, and they'll tell us what the law will be on it.
We see these infringement on civil liberties, and it's very concerning to me. It's very concerning to me that, like, conservatives who constantly, complain about big government and government overreach seem to be trusting of the one part of the government, like the security apparatus, that is most likely to violate your rights, and most often does. That's what just seems very odd to me.
Well, I get what you're saying. But I have said, and I'll say it again. I don't think that Trump has been. I don't think Trump's going to be proven to be right in the courts on every executive order he has entered. I don't think he will be. I think the court will say on some orders you're just wrong. Okay. But I think on most orders he's going to be upheld. Most of them he's going to be upheld. And the reason for that is because, like, our Congress has given our president so much authority to do things by executive order that it just surprises me that, like, why do we have a Congress? If he just comes in there and signs executive orders and signs executive orders and
do you agree that that's a problem? Do you agree that that's a problem, that Congress has largely abrogated its duties?
In some extent, yes, I do agree with that.
Okay, well, you and I are in agreement. I'm glad we were able to come to an agreement.
Yeah, I do think they have, but they do it for political reasons. It's easier to kick it off on the president and blame him than it is to say, hey, we could actually do something about this. Well, they don't do anything about it. Because what happens is like I would like to see, and I think this will happen. I know a lot of things that I know that Trump's trying to move quickly now, and he's trying to move very fast. So you're always trying to figure out what he's doing. I think that's by design. I think he's doing it on purpose. I think there's no question he's doing it one right after another to just keep them always fighting and flailing as to what's going to be his next move. Okay, but I think Republicans should also have to realize that at some point, if you don't take care of these things by acts of Congress and by legislative design, the next president comes in and just signs a whole bunch of executive orders and they're all gone again.
That's a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah, the next president, and they're all gone again. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, it can't be that way. Some of the stuff has to be like the president can do this. We do have co-equal branches of government. They do have to be co-equal. I'm not saying the president should be the lord over everything, and I'm not saying Congress should lord over the president either. I'm not saying that either. But that balance of that balance of the separation of powers will always be a debate that we'll have till we die, and it'll be continued on to the next generation.
Okay. Well, that's mainly all the questions that I had, and I think we had a good debate. I do hope that no one from the government just shows up and kidnaps you and deports you. I just want to let you know that I'm going to support your civil rights, even if you're not, necessarily going to support.
I would appreciate it if you would. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
If they showed